It was one of the largest attacks across Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Dozens of Russian missiles struck civilian targets in multiple Ukrainian cities, including the capital, Kyiv, which suffered the worst bloodshed in months. Ukraine says that at least 14 people were killed and more than 100 wounded. Millions of others lost electricity. The Kremlin called it retaliation for a weekend explosion on a vital bridge between Russia and occupied Crimea. Nick Schifrin begins our coverage.
They were killed on the road as they began their day. They were killed in their cars as they drove to work during the morning rush hour. And they were killed next to where children once climbed, a playground of giggles replaced by a city of sirens. Around the corner, the victims. She was too stunned to ask for help in a park in downtown Kyiv that became a center for triage. Medics did the best they could to save the injured. But today's wounds didn't only pierce skin, they pierced this city's sense of safety. What were they hit by? Beyond the photographers, another apparent target, the glass office building that a Russian rocket transformed into 1 million flying shards. After a first strike, this girl described how her hands were shaking until the next strike hits. Also targeted the city's icons, a bridge made of glass designed for tourists. The strikes drove Kyiv underground. Olena Somyuk and her daughter fled here from Ukraine's occupied south.
Really, I think because they are bastards. That's it. They want to destroy our people, our infrastructure, everything.
Ukraine's police said today's attacks did hit 70 infrastructure sites, especially the electricity grid. In total, Russian missiles hit at least 19 Ukrainian cities, from Lviv in the west to Kharkiv in the east to Zaporizhia in the southeast, where a Russian missile tore this apartment complex in half. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin called the strikes a response to Saturday's explosion on the only bridge linking Russia with occupied Crimea. Putin opened it personally in 2019. It was built by a childhood friend and symbolizes how he runs the country and his imperial ambition. It also provides vital materiel to Russia's war effort in southern Ukraine. Today, Putin threatened further retaliation.
If the attempts to carry out terrorist attacks on our territory continue, Russia's responses will be tough and proportionate to the level of threats posed to the Russian Federation.
President Biden spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by phone and said the strikes demonstrated the war's, quote, utter brutality. Tonight, Zelensky accused Russia of terrorism and vowed to rebuild everything Russia destroyed.
Ukraine cannot be intimidated. It will only unite more. Ukraine cannot be stopped. It will only be more convinced terrorists must be neutralized.
Ukrainians seem to keep the faith in that restoration. In the metro station turned bomb shelter, they sing a song about the spring. Even if winter is coming, they believe that better days could lie ahead. And to discuss today's attacks, I'm joined by Ihor Zhovka, Deputy Chief of Staff for President Zelensky in Kyiv. Ihor Zhovka, thank you very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. What's your response to this widespread attack across the country by Russia today?
Well, this is not the first widespread attack of Russia during the wartime, during the open warfare, which they started on 24th of February. Though, yes, I can admit that this was one of the most massive attacks. But what is different today is the reaction of Ukraine. There is no panic, there is no chaos.
Ukrainian officials have said almost 70 infrastructure sites were targeted, especially the electricity grid. How much damage to critical infrastructure, to the electricity grid, has there been today?
Yes, some damage has been made, but most of this infrastructure which was hit in the morning is already well repaired. The critical infrastructure, electricity grids, thermal power plants, were the obvious targets, which is, yes, testing the ground ahead of the very difficult winter period which is facing all of us.
President Putin said today this was a response to Saturday's explosion on the Kerch Strait Bridge, the only bridge linking Russia with occupied Crimea. The first question, of course, is did Ukraine attack the bridge?
Well, first of all, this has nothing to do with the response, I think, because, I mean, this is the first time that he hits the center of Kyiv or Lviv or Dnipro or other cities in Ukraine with cruise missiles. This is definitely not the first time and unfortunately not the last time. So I would not like to follow this Russian narrative of responses and counter-responses. But when probably you are losing in the war, then when they are not showing the success, you start to use the instruments which President of Russia is using as of now.
Nonetheless, did Ukraine attack the bridge across the Kerch Strait?
I don't have any information about any Ukrainian attacks, but what we witness is something wrong is going in the Crimea occupied territory as of practically the beginning of the war.
Do you believe that you could have shot down more of today's Russian missiles that struck Ukraine if you had gotten air defenses from the West that the West has been promising for months?
Definitely. Look, I will give you exact numbers. Out of 84 Russian cruise missiles which were targeted at Ukraine, more than 50 were shot down. Imagine if we had, for the time being already, at least those systems which were promised to us by Germany, by US, by some other countries. So definitely we badly need immediately now these anti-air defense systems.
Ukraine has made a lot of battlefield gains over the last few days and weeks. We've talked obviously a lot about the east, especially in Kharkiv. What about the south? It seems that Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian soldiers have had more difficulty in the south approaching Kherson, the city itself, as Russians are very well dug in around that city. So is it more difficult to achieve the success in the south than it has been in some of the parts of the east?
That's partially true because, yes, Russian armed forces have really strongly fortified themselves in the southern region. This is the main reason. But another reason is that the terrain is more complicated there than, for instance, in Kharkiv region. So the terrain it's a plain steppe, so you don't have any forests or mountains or whatever. But despite that, we're still having quite a good success in the Kherson region, and we will be further advancing there.
Here in Washington, as you know, there is a lot of concern about Putin's possibilities for escalation, especially nuclear escalation. We heard President Biden last week refer to Armageddon. What's your response to that U.S. concern?
We share the U.S. concern. We share the concern of President Biden and special forces of the U.S. and other countries. Our allies do share with us the relevant information. But what is very important for the countries who are possessing this also nuclear weapon to be united in order not to allow just a single country possessing the nuclear weaponry to threat and to blackmail the whole international community, because obviously in case if this weaponry would be used against Ukraine, it will affect not only Ukraine. So each and everyone should be very serious and thinking and reacting and preventing any possible use of this in every means possible.
Do you think President Putin is bluffing?
I don't think that this time it's only a bluff.
So you're concerned about Russia using a nuclear weapon in or around Ukraine?
Unfortunately, everything is possible.
Ihor Zhovka, Deputy Chief of Staff in President Zelensky's office, thank you very much.
Thank you.